Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another video. So, I posted a poll a little while ago in the community tab, and I asked whether or not you all would be interested in having me discuss a little bit about my thoughts on VR, meaning virtual reality. Just in case if you don't know what that is, I will refer to it as VR, because it's just easier to say rather than virtual reality every time. And it's been a while since my last episode of game discussion, so I figured that this would be a nice change of pace, just talking about games, because I love game discussion, and that's literally like what most of my videos are, but something about the gaming industry right now just doesn't have me that excited, so I feel kind of nice to go back to it like this. So getting started, I just feel that I should reiterate what I stated previously in a community post, which is that this video isn't really about me bashing VR or praising it. It's just more so me discussing my thoughts on it and what I would like to see later on from it. As we all know, VR is becoming more and more popular. Just recently, I believe that the game Half-Life Alyx was released, and whilst I have mixed feelings myself as well as most people, what everyone usually says is it's fairly decent. It's fairly decent. Now, once again, I don't really have experience with the game, and I actually do not have experience with the Half-Life games overall. Rah! How dare you? So you can say that I'm not really the person to judge when it comes down to understanding what's going on with the game and how it stacks up or whatnot. But honestly, I feel like because of the fact that it's not a regular game and it's a VR, it really gives some insight into how VRs can be. They can be very, very good. They have a lot of potential. And since this game that people were bashing for the most part because it's not actually, a regular game like they wanted, it did fairly well considering what people were going to talk about it. And it just shows that VRs as a whole, if they are in the right circumstances, can be fairly decent. Now, moving on from that, there have been a few things that I've personally wanted to address when it comes down to VR. Now, as it stands right now, personally, VR for me has a few issues keeping me away. Now, please do not misunderstand me. I am not saying that VR is bad. I'm not saying that these issues are absolutely terrible and VRs are unplayable because of them. They are just personal gripes that I have with them. For starters, motion controls. Now, motion controls, for me, make it very difficult to be precise. Some people love motion controls. Some people hate them. I'm in the latter. I don't necessarily hate them, but I don't really like them much. Precision is very important in a lot of games, especially shooters, which is why when there is shooting involved in a VR game, you can see that the reticle crosshair is the size of a darn golf ball. The hitbox has to be large enough to easily register the damage because there's a lack of accuracy when it comes to having to actually move around and aim in something with your motion controls while having to move and aim with your actual head and whatnot. So that makes things a lot more difficult. Which brings me to another point, which is pretty much the same point as a motion control, but it's usually I don't really care for the actual controller that is used when it comes down to the motion controls. I like to play games with a traditional controller, and the controls present with a VR game are motion controls, and then they're the usual, just the weird looking microphone look, or it has a hole in the top with triggers. I just never really cared for the appeal of that personally. I just like my standard, traditional controller. I just prefer something like that rather than what the heck ever that is, personally. Which brings us to what I'd like to see with VR now. I know that VR is only going to continue to get better with time, and, people usually believe that VR is the future, and it's eventually going to be the Matrix, where like we're actually going inside the game. And whilst that sounds good on paper, let's just be realistic for a moment. I'm just gonna have to be the guy with the realism banhammer. I know, but just hear me out. If they make a game where you can actually enter the game virtually and be in there virtually with no, issues and whatnot, there are going to be a few fundamental issues overall with that. First of all, the price for that would be astronomically high 9 times out of 10. Like, if most consoles now are slowly getting closer to approaching that $1,000 mark for a console, right? Just imagine a full-on VR console that is putting you in the freaking game. Like, that price, that is not going to be the most affordable price by any stretch of the imagination. Most people are going to be watching that alone because there's no way in the heck that someone's usually going to have that much money to spend on that console. Now, the thing with that I have, like, that can kind of fix that is, when most people say that VR is in the future, I can see where they're coming from, but I'd more so say that VR, like, in a simpler sense, is the future. Take the VR headset, for example. I think the VR headset with the controller is a lot more reasonable. Like, obviously with a traditional controller, not those motion controllers. That's just me personally. If you disagree, it's fine. But with a traditional controller, it seems a lot more reasonable for most people. And, a VR horror game that I feel did this really well is called Edge of Nowhere. It still maintained fairly solid gameplay, as solid as it can be for a VR game. And since you were using, a controller, that gave you the solid gameplay, and the VR headset gave you the feeling of virtual reality, the realism and whatnot. So if they were to do this, if they were to do that and approach it that way, where it's like they just focus on like some very solid headsets instead of a full-on VR console or whatever, I feel like that'll be better because that'll be a lot more affordable for people. Because, the Oculus Rift, Samsung headsets and whatnot, like, they're still very pricey, but they'd be nowhere near, like, what these people who are talking about, like, virtual reality being on the state of Matrix, people are not going to be able to afford that. So that's literally just going to be a luxury for the rich, and let's just be frank, that's not what we want. We want to all enjoy the game, so I feel like we gotta tune it down personally when it comes down to VR. So I feel like just the headsets with, controllers, and as that gets better, as the headsets get more advanced and stuff, people will still be able to enjoy the benefits of VR without having to pay an arm and a leg to play them, frankly. So with that being said, this has been my thoughts on VR. I hope that you all enjoyed. It's something that I very much look forward to, and VR, if it does indeed continue to improve and whatnot, then I'm going to be fairly excited because there's always been a few games that I'd love to play in VR. Me personally, I'd love to play Pokemon in VR. That just sounds absolutely amazing. Just throwing your Pokeballs and whatnot. You got this big Charizard or something. That just sounds amazing in VR personally. So I'm actually pretty excited when it comes down to VR. So I do hope that that is something that does, in fact, get pretty solid. If you made it this far in the video, I would like to just take this time to thank you for listening. And if you are indeed, in fact, interested in supporting the channel, please do feel free to subscribe. Hit that bell if you want to, as that will help you stay up to date with my videos. And as always, rate the video what you think it deserves. Tell me what you'd like to see in the future in the comments below. Feel free to check out my amino. It will be linked in the comments, as well as my BitChute, which will be linked in the About Me page of my channel, where I have a podcast there and talk about various topics. And I will see all of you in the next video. Take care.